On a snowy Christmas Eve, a lonely old man stepped into a small cafe just to warm up, but what he found inside would reignite everything he'd forgotten about life, love, and purpose. Days later, when powerful executives tried to shut that cafe down for being too kind, he did something no one saw coming. Before we go back, tell me where you're watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story will melt your heart. The snow fell thick and quiet over the city that Christmas Eve, blanketing the streets in white silence. Most shops had long since closed, their windows dark except for the occasional string of colored lights left burning through the night. But on the corner of Maple and 3rd, one small cafe still glowed warm against the cold. Harrison's Café, its windows fogged with heat, golden light spilling onto the snow-covered sidewalk. Robert Harrison stood across the street for a moment, collar turned up against the wind, watching the cafe through the falling snow. He was 78 years old, with silver hair that stuck out from under his wool cap and deep lines around his eyes that came from decades of both worry and laughter. To anyone passing by, he was just another old man seeking warmth on a bitter night. No one would guess that he'd built this place and 42 others like it from nothing. He crossed the street slowly, his boots crunching in the fresh snow, and pushed open the door. The warmth hit him first, and then the smell: coffee and cinnamon, butter and vanilla. A small bell chimed above the door. The cafe was half full, maybe 20 people scattered across the worn wooden tables. In the corner, a young couple shared a piece of pie. Near the window, an elderly woman sat alone with a book. At the counter, a man in a threadbare coat nursed a cup of coffee, his hands wrapped around it for warmth. Evening, came a voice, bright and welcoming. "Cold enough for you out there?" Robert looked up to see a woman in her late 30s, dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, approaching with a menu and a smile that reached her eyes. Her name tag read Joyce, manager. "Cold enough," Robert agreed, his voice gravelly. "Just a coffee if that's all right." "More than all right, that's what we're here for." Joyce led him to a table by the window, the one with the best view of the street. "Regular or decaf?" "Regular. At my age, sleep's overrated anyway." Joyce laughed, a real laugh, not the customer service kind. "I'll bring you something special. You look like you could use it." As she walked away, Robert settled into the chair and looked around. The cafe had changed very little in the 15 years since he'd stepped back from day-to-day operations. The same Edison bulbs hung from the ceiling. The same mismatched chairs surrounded tables that had been refinished so many times they'd taken on a character of their own. The walls were covered with community notices: lost cats, guitar lessons, a hand-drawn poster for a church choir looking for members. And there near the door, something new, a small chalkboard that read "Pay it forward, buy a coffee for someone who needs it." Below it, a cluster of paper coffee cups hung on strings, each one representing a prepaid drink for anyone who couldn't afford one. Robert felt something tighten in his chest. Joyce returned with his coffee and a slice of apple pie he hadn't ordered. "On the house," she said, setting it down. "Anyone spending Christmas Eve alone in a cafe deserves pie." "I'm not alone," Robert said quietly, looking around at the other customers. "Plenty of people here." Joyce followed his gaze and smiled. "You know what? You're right." She pulled out the chair across from him. "Mind if I sit for a minute? It's been a long shift, please." She sat with a grateful sigh, cradling her own mug of coffee. "So what brings you out tonight?" "Family, all busy." Robert took a sip of his coffee. It was perfect, rich and hot without being bitter. "My wife passed away 3 years ago. No children. I suppose I just wanted to be somewhere that felt alive." Joyce's expression softened. "I'm sorry about your wife, but I'm glad you came here." She gestured around the cafe. "We try to keep it open on holidays. Someone should be here for the people who need a place to go." "That's kind of you." "It's not kindness," Joyce said. "It's just right, you know. My husband died 5 years ago. I know what it's like to have nowhere to be on Christmas. This place saved me that first year." She looked down at her coffee. "So now I try to save other people, I guess." Before Robert could respond, a young man appeared from behind the counter, early 20s, with tired eyes but quick hands. His name tag read Tom. "Joyce, we're getting low on whipped cream, and that family in the back just asked for 5 hot chocolates. I'll get more from storage. Can you check on table 7? I think they've been waiting a while." "On it." Tom moved off with practiced efficiency. Joyce stood. "Sorry, duty calls, but enjoy the pie, okay? And if you need anything, I'll wave," Robert said. "Thank you." She squeezed his shoulder as she passed, a small gesture that felt enormous in its genuine warmth. Robert ate his pie slowly, savoring each bite. The apples were soft and sweet. the crust buttery and flaked just right. Through the window he watched the snow continue to fall, covering the city in clean white silence. Inside the cafe hummed with quiet life, the hiss of the espresso machine, the clink of spoons on saucers, the low murmur of conversation. At the table next to him a woman was reading to a small child from a worn picture book. The child's eyes were heavy with sleep, but they fought to stay awake, drawn in by the story. At the counter, an older man, possibly homeless, judging by the 3 layers of coats, was working through a bowl of soup, eating slowly as if to make it last. Betty, the older waitress with kind eyes and quick movements, was refilling the homeless man's coffee without being asked. She leaned in and said something that made him smile. This, Robert thought, this is what it was supposed to be. 50 years ago, when he and his late wife Eleanor had opened the first Harrison's Café, they'd had a simple philosophy: make good food, charge fair prices, and treat everyone like family. The cafe had been Eleanor's dream, really. She'd grown up poor, the daughter of factory workers, and she'd never forgotten what it felt like to stand outside a fancy restaurant, looking in at a world she couldn't afford. Nobody should feel like they don't belong, she'd said. Not in our place. And for 30 years that's what they'd built, a place where everyone belonged. The business had grown, multiplied, spread across the state, but as Robert had gotten older and eventually stepped back, a new management team had taken over. Young, ambitious people with MBAs and market research and strategies for brand positioning. They were good at what they did. Profits were up, the company was expanding faster than ever, but something had been lost in translation. Robert was pulled from his thoughts by a sudden flicker, once, twice, and then the lights went out completely. The cafe fell into darkness, broken only by the ambient glow of the snowy street outside. For a moment there was silence. Then a child's voice. "Mommy, what happened?" "Just a power outage, sweetie. It's okay." Joyce's voice cut through the darkness, calm and clear. "Everyone stay seated, please. We've got this. Tom, can you grab the emergency candles from the back? Already on it." Within minutes, tea lights and pillar candles began appearing on every table, transforming the cafe into something that looked almost medieval, flickering shadows on the walls, faces half-lit and mysterious in the golden glow. The espresso machine was dead, but Joyce moved behind the counter anyway, pulling out a camping stove that she must have kept for exactly this kind of emergency. "We can still heat water," she announced. "So tea, hot chocolate, and instant coffee are still on the menu, and the pie's still good." This got a few laughs. Betty was already moving through the cafe, distributing candles and blankets, actual blankets that appeared to have been stored somewhere in the back. "Where did those come from?" someone asked. "Joyce keeps them for winter," Betty said. "Never know when someone might need one." Robert watched, transfixed, as the cafe adapted. Far from panicking or shutting down, the place seemed to come even more alive. Tom emerged from the back with an old acoustic guitar. "Anyone mind some music?" he called out. "Play Silent Night," someone suggested. Tom sat on a stool near the counter and began to play. His voice was untrained but sincere, and within moments others were joining in. Even the homeless man at the counter, his voice surprisingly strong and clear. "Silent Night, Holy Night." Robert felt his throat tighten. He couldn't remember the last time he'd sung this song, maybe at Eleanor's funeral when they'd played her favorite hymns. She would have loved this moment, he thought. This exact moment with the candles and the singing and the pure, simple human warmth. A gust of wind rattled the windows and Joyce looked toward the door. Through the glass a figure was visible on the street, a woman, hunched against the cold, clearly homeless, hovering just outside the cafe's warmth. Without hesitation, Joyce moved to the door and opened it. Cold air rushed in. "Ma'am, would you like to come inside?" The woman looked up, surprised. She was perhaps 50, with weathered skin and eyes that had seen too much. "I don't have any money." "That's okay. Come in out of the cold, please." The woman hesitated, then stepped inside. Joyce guided her to an empty seat near the small electric heater that was running on battery backup. Within minutes, Betty had brought her hot chocolate and a sandwich. "Thank you," the woman whispered, tears in her eyes. "Thank you so much." Joyce knelt beside her chair. "No one should be alone tonight," she said softly. "Merry Christmas." Robert stood up. He couldn't just sit there anymore. Moving to the counter, he caught Joyce's attention. "What can I do to help?" She looked surprised. "You don't have to. I want to." She studied him for a moment, then smiled. "Okay, can you help Tom hand out these blankets? And there's some extra food in the back." sandwiches we made for tomorrow. We should probably share them while they're fresh. For the next hour, Robert worked alongside the staff, distributing food and blankets, refilling water glasses, even washing dishes by candlelight in the back. The cafe had transformed from a business into something else entirely, a refuge, a community center, a reminder that people could still take care of each other. More people had come in from the cold, not customers, exactly, but people who needed shelter. Joyce turned no one away. Tom played song after song. Someone started telling stories, and soon everyone was sharing memories of past Christmases, funny anecdotes, even a few jokes that made the whole room laugh. At one point, Robert found himself standing next to Betty, both of them watching the scene unfold. "This is special," Betty said quietly. "This is what it's all about, you know. Not the fancy decorations or the expensive gifts, just this, people being kind to each other." "How long have you worked here?" Robert asked. 12 years, best job I ever had." She looked at him. "Joyce is something special. She could make more money somewhere else, but she stays because she cares about this place, about the people." "That's rare, rarer every day," Betty agreed. Around midnight, the power flickered back on. The sudden brightness was almost jarring after so long in candlelight. But instead of celebration, there was an almost disappointed sigh. "It was prettier with candles," a child said, and everyone laughed. Joyce stood in the middle of the cafe and raised her hands. "Thank you all for being here tonight, for sharing this with us. This is what makes it all worthwhile." Her voice caught slightly. "This is what Christmas is supposed to feel like." There was applause, genuine heartfelt applause. As people began to gather their things, Robert approached the counter. He pulled out his wallet and left 3 $50 bills under his coffee cup, tucked out of sight. Joyce caught his arm as he was putting on his coat. "You don't have to. I want to," he said simply. "Thank you for tonight, for remembering what matters." She looked at him curiously. "You talk like you've seen it forgotten." "I have. Too many times." He buttoned his coat. "But not here, not tonight." As he walked to the door, he passed the chalkboard with the pay it forward cups. He added another 50 to the jar beside it, enough to cover 20 coffees. The cold hit him as he stepped outside, but he didn't mind. The snow had stopped, and the sky was starting to clear, stars visible through the gaps in the clouds. He walked slowly down the street, his breath misting in the air. Behind him, Harrison's cafe glowed warm in the winter night, a small beacon of kindness in a cold world. It was only later, when Joyce was cleaning up and found the money under the coffee cup, that she discovered the small note written on a napkin. "Kindness never costs too much. Keep the lights on." She held it for a long moment, then carefully folded it and put it in her pocket, next to her heart. Robert returned to the cafe 3 days later, then again the day after that. Within 2 weeks, he'd become a regular fixture, the quiet old man who always sat at the corner table, nursing his coffee and watching the world go by. No one questioned it. Regulars were common at Harrison's, and Robert fit right in. He was polite, tipped well, and never caused any trouble. Joyce would always greet him with a smile and a fresh cup of coffee, and they'd chat briefly about the weather or the neighborhood before she moved on to other customers. What no one knew was that Robert was studying the cafe with the intensity of a detective. He watched everything. He saw how Tom would stay late without being asked when Joyce was overwhelmed, how he'd slip extra whipped cream onto hot chocolates for kids, how he'd patiently explain the difference between a latte and a cappuccino to confused customers for the 100th time. He noticed that Tom arrived every morning with dark circles under his eyes, and overheard him on the phone one day talking to someone about his mother's medical bills. He saw how Betty knew every regular by name and remembered their orders, their kids' names, their struggles. How she'd slip an extra cookie into a bag for the construction worker who came in every morning at 5 a.m. How she'd sit with lonely elderly customers and let them talk, really talk, without rushing them along. He watched her comfort a young woman who'd just lost her job, pressing a $20 bill into her hand when she thought no one was looking. And he saw Joyce, how she ran the place with a perfect balance of efficiency and warmth. How she'd quietly comp meals for people who were obviously struggling. How she kept a box behind the counter filled with scarves and gloves for anyone who needed them. How she'd started a tradition of leaving containers of food scraps outside the back door for the stray cats and dogs in the neighborhood. "They're hungry too," she'd explained to Tom when he'd asked about it. "We throw away so much food that's still perfectly good." So now we partner with the Maple Street Shelter and a local rescue group. They pick it up every night before it expires. That way it's safe, legal, and still helps people and animals who need it. Robert watched as this simple act had evolved into something more organized. Now there were designated containers, one for cats, one for dogs, and Joyce had even contacted a local animal rescue to help trap, spay and release the strays. A bulletin board near the back had photos of animals that had been adopted through the cafe's informal network. One evening, Robert watched as a well-dressed woman in her 40s left a $20 bill with Joyce and said, "That's for whoever needs it. For their coffee or meal or whatever." After the woman left, Joyce added the 20 to a jar behind the counter labeled Community Fund. Robert learned that this was a regular occurrence, customers paying forward meals, leaving extra tips to be redistributed, contributing to a collective pot that Joyce used to help people who came in hungry or cold. "We're not a charity," Joyce had explained to a new employee Robert overheard. "We're a business, but we're also a community space. If someone needs help and we can provide it without going under, why wouldn't we?" Robert began keeping notes in a small leather journal. He tracked customer retention rates, average transaction values, peak hours, and most importantly, the intangible metrics: how many regulars came in daily, how many people lingered to talk with staff, how many strangers became friends over shared tables. The numbers told a story that warmed his heart. This location had a 94% customer retention rate. The average customer visited 4.3 times per week. Review scores averaged 4.9 stars across all platforms. And the comments were what mattered most. "This place feels like home. The staff actually remembers my name. I was having the worst day and the manager noticed and just listened. Didn't try to fix it, just listened. They helped me when I had nothing. Now I'm back on my feet and I come here every day to pay it forward." This was it, Robert realized. This was what he and Eleanor had dreamed of, what they'd built in the early days before committees and market research and brand strategies. This was the soul of Harrison's Café, still alive and beating in this one small location. But how many other locations had lost it? Robert began visiting other Harrison's cafes across the city, always in his disguise as just another elderly customer. What he found troubled him deeply. The newer locations were cleaner, more modern, more profitable, and completely soulless. The staff were efficient but distant, trained to execute transactions rather than build relationships. The decor was stylish but sterile, all matching furniture, carefully curated art, mood lighting designed by consultants. The menus had been elevated to include artisanal this and handcrafted that, with prices to match. A simple coffee that cost $3 at Maple Street was $5.50 downtown. The community boards were gone, replaced with carefully curated art pieces that said nothing. The Pay It Forward programs had been discontinued as off-brand. The mismatched chairs had been replaced with uniform seating. Even the music was controlled by corporate. The same playlist in every location, optimized through focus groups. At one location in the business district, Robert watched as staff turned away a homeless man who'd simply wanted to sit out of the cold, even though the cafe was nearly empty. "Company policy," the manager had said, not unkindly but firmly. "We can't have non-paying customers taking up space. It affects the ambiance." Robert had left without ordering, his coffee sitting untouched on the counter. At another location, he overheard a server being reprimanded for spending too long talking to an elderly customer. "Your job is to serve efficiently and move on," the shift supervisor said. "We have table turn rates to maintain." Robert made detailed notes of everything he observed. The